We talked about this slide yesterday, and I think the important point is that you realize there's 4 different ways that PTH, parathyroid hormone, makes the calcium level in your blood go up. First of all, by activating the osteoclasts, which remember eat up the bone. Remember they're big old cells that have like a whole bunch of nuclei in them. You remember that from way back when? So that they eat up the bone, release the bone into the release the calcium into the bloodstream. That raises it. Inhibits the osteoblasts. The osteoblasts are the ones that make the bone. Remember, and if they're not working well and making bone, then they're not taking calcium out of the system. So therefore, calcium goes up. Enhances the reabsorption of calcium at the kidneys, and it stimulates the formation of calcitriol. And calcitriol is another hormone that we'll talk about more when we get to the kidney. But basically what it does is it makes the GI tract absorb more calcium. So if you're absorbing more, that also raises your blood calcium level. So there's 4 different ways it works, which is kind of interesting, I think. And don't get calcitriol and calcitonin confused like I did the other day. For a few seconds, I think I corrected myself. But remember, there's 2 different hormones. They both have a role in calcium metabolism. Okay, so I can probably just tell you right now that one of the potential essay questions on this next exam will be explain calcium metabolism. There's a question for you. And this is a kind of an example that I think you should pay attention to and read over, and when you go through the book, understand this carefully. Obviously, homeostasis puts the calcium level between 8.5 and 11. Not that you need to know that number, but if it gets too high and the calcium rises, then the thyroid gland makes calcitonin. Calcitonin is that drug made by the C cells. Remember, the hormone made by the C cells, the ones in between the follicles and the thyroid. And that leads to increased excretion of calcium. That's going to lower your calcium. Calcium is going to be made more by the osteoblasts and by inhibition of the osteoclasts. And then that's going to start bringing the blood calcium level down, and you're going to restore homeostasis like this. On the other hand, if if the calcium levels fall, that's what the bottom part of this circle, if your calcium level gets too low, then your parathyroid hormones are going to kick in. You're going to make more parathyroid hormone because remember, PTH raises calcium levels. And that works in 4 different ways, which we just talked about, and that's going to bring the calcium levels back up to restore homeostasis again. So, there's a lot of factors involved in calcium regulation, but calcium is a very important ion in our bodies. It makes our heart beat, it makes our muscles contract, it makes lots of things happen. So, you'll need to know that. I'll give you a list of the essay questions here, and I'll probably publish it in the next day or so online, since I don't have it ready to hand to you today. Let's talk about the adrenal glands next. They live along the lateral superior border of each kidney. They're divided into 2 parts, and I think it's important that you understand the parts of the adrenal glands. So I'm going to kind of draw them up here on the board as we go through this. Let's just say that the adrenal gland looks like this, and it has a medulla which looks like that. Okay, so this is called the medulla, and this out here is called the cortex, and it's going to get more complicated than that because the cortex is divided into several other layers. But basically, the cortex, like it says on that picture there, does the steroid hormones, basically. The steroid hormones, the adrenocortical steroids, that's what they're called, adrenocortical steroids, because they're made in the adrenal cortex. Get it? The medulla, the center part, is the one that releases all of the epinephrine and norepinephrine. So this one here does epi and norepinephrine, and when this thing gets stimulated, this actually has nerve fibers that come from your brain up on the top of your head. You know, we have nerve fibers that go down here and fire into the medulla that cause the release of epinephrine in the fight or flight mode. Okay, that's what we're talking about. The medulla of the cortex is one of the major factors in releasing epinephrine into your bloodstream that gets you pumped up on adrenaline and ready for fight or flight. As it says here, the metabolic changes of that epinephrine release lasts for several minutes. Now, I wish it said a number of minutes, because that would probably be a little more accurate. So what does several mean? 2 or 3, 4 or 5? It's a little longer than that. When you get in the fight or flight mode, when the tiger walks in the room, you don't get over it right away. It takes a while for that massive release of epinephrine to relax. The suprarenal cortex is divided into 3 regions. We're going to go over them right now. The 3 different regions of the cortex out here each make different kinds of hormones. So I'm going to kind of split it into 3 parts here, like that. And there's the 3 names of them, the 3 zonas, and let's start with the zona glomerulosa on the outside. So here's the zona glomerulosa. And it makes mineralocorticoids. Well, what does that mean? That means steroids that control your minerals, okay? The minerals that it basically controls are sodium and potassium, okay? So the main hormone out there is called mineralocorticoids. And the biggest one is aldosterone. And let me just say that when you have aldosterone circulating in your body, you are not pushing a lot of salt and potassium out in your pee. You're holding on to it. Okay? So the biggest thing that aldo does is it stimulates the conservation of sodium and the elimination of potassium. We have a number of drugs that are used in blood pressure management that work on this drug right here, work on this hormone. Because obviously if you have high blood pressure, it's because you have too much blood, you have too much volume, so you want to get rid of some of it. And so the drugs are basically anti-aldos. You can think of them like that. And if they're anti-aldos, that means more salt passes out in your urine. You diurese it off, and you have less blood volume, and therefore you have less blood pressure. Okay? I'm putting that a little bit ahead of the game, but just to try to help you remember this. So what would make you make more aldosterone? Well, if aldosterone is going to make you hold on to sodium, then what would make you make more aldosterone was something in which you lost salt. So if you cut yourself and you bled, you're losing blood, but you're also losing other stuff. So anything that causes a major drop in your sodium, drop in your blood volume, in other words, bleed, or a drop in your blood pressure, because you don't have enough of all this stuff, or maybe because your heart isn't working right, all of those will cause you to hold on to sodium. And there you have it. A rise in blood potassium concentration will also do it, because remember that it causes you to conserve sodium, but to eliminate potassium. So if your potassium level is getting too high, you're going to want to have less aldo so you can pass more out, right? Y'all got to think these things through. All right, so that's the zona glomerulosa. The next one is the zona fasciculata. I did something bad. I hit one of these buttons here that was bad. Come on, electronics, work for me.
I'm sure there's take your nice.
It's like it has to think about it.
Do you have nightmares about this?
Isn't it like the speed of light? Why does that take so long, you know? All right, so zona fasciculata produces glucocorticoids. Now, as you might expect, glucocorticoids can manage your blood sugar. They help you control your blood sugar, and the main one involved there is called corticosterone, which is converted to cortisone. Let's just say, I'm going to call it a corticosteroids. Corticosteroids. The corticosteroids inhibit the production of corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH. That's the one that lives in your hypothalamus, gets in that little portal system and goes down to your adenohypophysis, the front part of your pituitary gland, causes the release of these guys here. It causes the release of ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone. So ACTH, released from the pituitary gland, goes to the medulla here and causes release of these hormones that we're talking about. This is when you think of cortisone and cortisone shots and people taking cortisone for asthma or people taking cortisone for lots and lots of reasons, arthritis, whatever. There's a lot of patients in the world that are on steroids, on corticosteroids, because it really helps with a lot of diseases. But it has side effects too that aren't so great. One of the things is that it causes increased glucose synthesis and glycogen formation. It also tends to make these people fat, makes them hold on to sugar more, and we'll talk about the problems with too much adrenocorticosteroids in a minute. The biggest thing, and the reason that corticosteroids are used in treatment of lots of these diseases, is because they have a huge anti-inflammatory effect. Now, you probably have friends who use breathers that get a little touch of asthma, and they're on breathers to help them with their breathing. Well, a lot of those breathers are, we talked about this when we were doing the autonomic nerves. A lot of them are beta 2 inhibitors or blockers, and but these are the anti-inflammatory effects. So if you have asthma and you react to everything, every little bit of pollen or all this other crap that's in the air, you take a cortisone inhaler, and that will cut down on your reaction to those things and hopefully make your symptoms better. So it's a very strong anti-inflammatory effect. And if anybody has ever had a cortisone shot into a joint or something, or into a sore spot, the whole idea of cortisone shots is right here. It's to inhibit the white cells, it's to inhibit the inflammatory response. Okay? Make you better. But it's not very selective. It shuts down all these components of the immune system so that you don't respond to things you'd like your body to respond to. It doesn't so much when you're on these steroids. Okay. The last zone is the zona reticularis. That's this one right here. And I've got my diagram's kind of a mess here, but that's typical. You know, I give these, you guys will get one too. We can do on all your classes, I guess. You get these little course evaluations at the end of the term. And I really appreciate them because students are always giving me suggestions on what I could do better. And one of them that always has stuck with me is a student says, Dr. Sessions, the problem with you is you don't write on the board enough. And I'm like, what? Like, I can't draw. I'm a terrible artist. And look I can't even write and make it neat. But I was so amazed by that. So I try to write on the board more. Do you guys like writing on the board?
Yeah.
Isn't it better on a PowerPoint where it's nice and neat and clean and I can give it to you ahead of time? Well, anyway, here we go. This is my attempt to answer that student's request for more writing on the board. So the zona reticularis is a pretty narrow piece right here, right up next to the medulla, and it produces androgens. So it produces androgens, and androgens are sex hormones. Okay? They get stimulated by ACTH as well. ACTH is the drug released by the pituitary that makes them secrete as well. Now, I don't want you to freak when you see this next picture. I think it's the next one. Here they are. Here's where they live. The adrenal glands, suprarenal glands, either name is fine by me. Please notice they have a very extensive blood supply, just like all of these endocrine glands. They have lots of blood flowing to them. Because remember, the stuff they make, all they're going to do is throw it out of the cells, and it's going to be picked up by the bloodstream and carried around the body to have all these other effects. So notice that there's actually 3 arteries going to each one of these little guys. One is the inferior suprarenal artery, which comes off of the renal artery, which is going to the kidney. This is a very big artery going to your kidney. So there's the inferior suprarenal. Here's the middle suprarenal. It comes right off the aorta. And the final one here is the superior suprarenal, which comes off these are the phrenic arteries, in right and left inferior phrenics. Phrenics, what do you think they carry blood to? Phrenic, diaphragm, right? Diaphragm. Phrenic nerve innervates the diaphragm. That's why you can breathe if you break your neck below enough level, below the 3-4 level, C3, C4 level. Anyway, lots of blood. That's all that really needs to show you. Here's the diagram that I didn't want to freak you out with, but probably will. This is the medulla up here. This is what it looks like under the microscope, and we have really nice slides of this over in the lab. Zona reticularis is the inner one, so it's the sex hormones are made here. Zona fasciculata is the bigger one. It makes the glucocorticoids, and then the zona glomerulosa is the one on the outside, and it makes the mineralocorticoids like aldosterone. Then there's a little capsule around the outside of it. I would only tell you this. I'm not going to give you a test question where it focuses in on the zona fasciculata, and I say, what zone is this? Because they don't look that much different to me. I might give you a picture of the whole thing like that, and it'll be a nice, neat picture where you can see the medulla, the capsule, and everything in between, and ask you, what's this or what's that? Okay? The let's talk about the medulla now for just a minute. It has two kinds of cells. You can't identify the difference between the cells under the microscope, and I don't want you to. Just know that one of them produces epinephrine, adrenaline, which is about 75 or 80% of the secretions of the medulla, and the other one is norepinephrine, which is just one little carbon different. And that's about 25% of the medullary secretions. A couple other wrap-ups real quick on other little endocrine organs that you need to be aware of, and you need to know about two things about most of these, or several of these. One is the pineal gland. You remember it from when we studied the brain. It was one of those little round, tiny dot kind of things on the cross-section on the slice of the brain. It lives on the posterior portion of the roof of the third ventricle. You remember the third ventricle is down there by the on the way back towards the medulla. Fourth ventricle is the one that really touches the medulla and the cerebellum, so it's a little bit anterior to that. It contains pinealocytes, and they make the hormone melatonin. And I think we've talked about melatonin before, and I have a bottle of melatonin pills by my bed because it's a really cheap and very natural sleep aid. Melatonin is a drug that we all have circulating in our bodies. It's this hormone that helps us relax at night and go to sleep. It also inhibits your reproductive functions. If you're sleepy, you don't want to do that, probably. That's why I don't hardly ever take it. And just kidding.
Does melatonin also help with alertness during the day?
Does it make you more alert? No, I don't think so. It's part of the circadian rhythm, you know, of up and down, so that you know when it's nighttime, it's time to sleep, and you know when it's daytime, it's time to be awake.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Like, nighttime, so it's time to sleep. Daytime, so time to be alert.
So you don't make much melatonin during the day,
Okay.
is the way that works. Yeah. Those rhythms are called circadian rhythms. Circadian means there's a 24-hour rhythm to life, and that's like we were just talking. It's why you sleep at night and you're awake during the day. I noticed that there's some ads on TV these days that talk about some guy who's blind. He's totally blind, so he can't tell the difference between day and night. And they have a new drug that helps, so he doesn't know when to sleep. He doesn't have the circadian rhythms, and so they've come up with a drug that will help with that. So he takes the pill, and it makes him know it's nighttime or know it's daytime. I don't know. These drug companies, I just find them amazing because they invent a drug like that, which probably has 1,000 people in the United States that would ever want to use such a thing. And then they sell it for $5,000 a month. And the insurance companies don't have any choice about whether they pay for it because the patients have got an insurance contract with the insurance company, and the insurance company says, we're going to buy your drugs for you. And so they kind of have to. The thing that's really sad about the whole thing, and you guys should pay attention to drug ads on TV. There's a lot of A&P to be learned from the drug ads. But the other thing that's most concerning to me is it's kind of all out of control. And the drug companies are spending, you know, they say, oh, we have to charge these really high prices because we have to do all this research to come up with these new drugs. And that's why, you know, the human civilization is advancing forward, because we're inventing all these new drugs, right? Think about before we had insulin, you know, and all the diabetics just died. But anyway, the drug companies spend 19 times more money on promotion, on ads, than they do on research. So explain that one to me. They spend 19 times more money on advertisements on TV, advertisements to doctors, all that jazz, than they do on research. But that's their excuse, is, oh, we have to have this real big money because we have to do the research. Yeah?
So I'm trying to figure out the pathway of this. So does your pineal gland require, like, your rods and your cones to be working in your eye?
Well, it sounds like that's one of the things that's required. It's probably more than that. I mean, let's face it, it gets quieter at night, so it's part of your hearing as well. I just think it's a whole bunch of things. Let's talk about the pancreas next for a few minutes. The pancreas is an organ that we will talk about again when we get to the digestive tract in 233. The pancreas has two major functions. One is an exocrine function, and remember what exocrine means? It means there's a duct, right? So an exocrine function, there's a duct that runs down the length of the pancreas and collects all the juices that are manufactured in the pancreas and dumps them into the intestine to help you digest your food. And that's 99% of the pancreas, by the way. 99% of the pancreas is the exocrine portion. And then there's these little tiny islets of Langerhans that you've probably heard about, because it's a Jeopardy question about every 2 weeks on Jeopardy. I watch Jeopardy almost every night. My wife and I try to get 10 questions right every night. Most nights I get more than that, but sometimes I don't. Anyway, the question is always under the geography thing. It says, where in the world do you find the islets of Langerhans? And the answer is in the pancreas. Not really a geography question, right? But sort of tricky. Well, anyway. So the endocrine pancreas is these little clusters of cells called pancreatic islets, or islets of Langerhans. They're really distinctive looking when you look under the microscope. You won't have any problems identifying the islets. They're just kind of scattered around, one here and one there. They just look different. I've got a picture to show you here in the middle. It makes there's three basic kinds as well. It says here 4. I just want you to know about these two right here pretty much, because alpha cells make glucagon and beta cells make insulin. Now, insulin is clearly one of the most important hormones that we have in our body. It is the one that allows the sugar molecules to get through the membrane, the cell membranes, to get into the cells. Sugar doesn't do us any good just circulating around in our blood. The only time it does us any good is when the sugar can get into the cells, where we can burn it up and make ATP and all that good stuff with it. So, in order to get it into the cells, you have to have insulin. If you don't have insulin, your blood sugar rises, you become diabetic eventually. We'll talk about diabetes more in a little bit here. Alpha cells produce glucagon, and glucagon, you can think of glucagon as being just the opposite of insulin. Okay, so insulin brings your blood sugar down. glucagon brings your blood sugar up. When you eat a meal and your blood sugar starts to go up, your body releases more insulin to pull your blood sugar down. When you skip a meal and you go 12 hours without eating, then your blood sugar is starting to fall a little bit, and you will secrete glucagon to bring it up. And by the way, if anybody ever tells you, oh, I'm feeling so bad today, I think I must be hypoglycemic, that ain't true. Hypoglycemia is a 1 in 10,000 people thing where they really get low on their blood sugar. It's usually caused by what's called an insulinoma. It's a tumor that makes way too much insulin. It just hardly ever happens. Our body does everything to keep our blood sugar from going too low, because when our blood sugar does go too low, people pass out, and that's about the worst situation you can ever find yourself in. Okay, so here's a picture of the pancreas. The pancreas lives kind of at the back of your abdomen. It lives retroperitoneally. In other words, it's behind the peritoneal cavity. We really don't dissect the pancreas till we get to the digestive tract on your cats, and you'll see it. It's a very interesting organ. It's really kind of hard to see. It's just not real obvious, but it lays back there on the back. Here's the common bile duct coming down from the liver. The bile duct and the main pancreatic duct both enter into this little opening called the duodenal papillae. And the pancreas makes about 1 liter of fluid a day. The bile makes about 1,500 cc's of fluid a day, and they both dump in here to mix with your food in the duodenum. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine right after it leaves your stomach. Here's what an islet of Langerhans looks like. So this is the 1%, and the rest of this, which is not shown all that much here, but this is 99% of what the pancreas looks like these guys out here. So you ought to look at that under the microscope and know what a pancreatic islet of Langerhans looks like. You do not have to be able to say, yeah, this is an alpha cell, and yeah, that's a beta cell. You just don't have to know that, because I can't tell. If I can't tell, you don't have to. We were just talking about blood sugar levels. Let's talk about it here for another second. When their blood sugar levels rise, okay, say we've just eaten a big meal or eaten a lot of sugar, our blood sugar starts to rise, and then the beta cells kick in and start making insulin. And when they make insulin, that stimulates the sugar that's out in your blood to move across the plasma membranes and into the cells. So in some ways, you can think of diabetes, a person who can't make enough insulin, as being kind of like the guy in the lifeboat. Water, water everywhere.